Picture a boy standing in a field with sheep, and nobody is bothered to call him inside. His father has 7 other sons lined up in the house. A prophet is sitting there with a horn of oil in his hand, and one by one, the older brothers walk past him, tall, broad-shouldered, exactly what you would picture if someone told you to imagine a king. And one by one, the prophet shakes his head. No, not this one. Not this one either. Finally, the prophet asks a question that changes everything. Is this all of them? And the father says, well, there is the youngest. But he is with the sheep. You already know how this story ends. You know the name David. You know he becomes the greatest king Israel ever had. But right now, in this moment, if you had walked into that house, you would not have picked him either. Nobody in that family thought he was worth calling in from the field. This is not a story about one shepherd boy. This is not a story about luck. This is not a story about a lonely exception buried in an old book. This is a story about a pattern so consistent, so deliberate, that once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. 10 times, across 2,000 years of scripture, God looked at a room full of the obvious choice and walked straight past it to the person nobody would have picked, maybe including you. And there is one name coming later on this list, a name so shocking that the town she came from never fully got over it. You will meet her, but not yet. Let's start where the pattern starts. In a field, with a boy nobody called. The Hebrew word for what David is doing out there is simple. He is a shepherd. A roe, the lowest job a family could hand off to its youngest member. Shepherds slept outside. Shepherds smelled like the animals they kept. Shepherds were not brought into the house when a prophet came calling, because nobody imagined they had a reason to be. And yet the man who anoints David that day says something the rest of the Bible will keep circling back to, again and again, for you to hear. The Lord does not see the way man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance. The Lord looks at the heart. Hold on to that one sentence. It is the key to everything you are about to hear. Stay with me, because the field is not the strangest place God chooses to find someone. Move north into hill country. Generations earlier, picture a man crouched inside a wine press. And he is not making wine, he is threshing wheat in secret, hunched low, because the Midianites have been raiding this land for 7 straight years, and if they see grain sitting out in the open, they will take it before nightfall. His name is Gideon, and an angel sits down under a nearby tree and calls out to him with words that must have sounded almost like a joke to his own ears. Mighty man of valor. You can imagine Gideon looking around, checking if the angel might be talking to someone else. He is not mighty. He is hiding in a hole in the ground. And when he finally answers, he says it plainly. No excuses, no softening. My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. The Hebrew word he uses for himself is katan, small, least, the bottom of the list. This is a man telling God out loud to his face that he has picked the wrong person for the job. Here's what most people miss about that moment. God does not argue with Gideon's assessment. God does not say, no, actually, you're quite talented. You're underselling yourself. God simply says, I will be with you, as if that one sentence has always been the only qualification that mattered. 2 men, 2 fields, 2 people nobody was looking for, found anyway. But it gets stranger, because the next name on this list is not even supposed to be in the story. Picture Jericho, a walled city about to fall, and 2 spies who have slipped inside to scout it before the invasion. They are hiding on a roof, in the house of a woman named Rahab. She runs an inn. She sells herself for money. She is a Canaanite. which means by every category that mattered to Israel at that time, she is an outsider all the way through. Wrong nation, wrong God, wrong life. And when the king's men come pounding on her door, looking for the spies, she lies to protect them. She hides them under stalks of flax on her roof, and she sends the soldiers running the wrong direction down the road. You would expect a story like this to end right there. A useful lie. A footnote. A woman who helped once and disappears from the record forever. That is not what happens to her. Rahab becomes part of Israel. Her whole family is spared when the walls come down. And centuries later, when a genealogy is written out, tracing the ancestry of the Messiah himself, her name is sitting right there in that list. Not hidden, not softened, written down on purpose. For anyone reading closely enough to notice it. This is not a story about a lucky lie. This is not a story about a woman who got a pass because she happened to be useful for one night. This is not a story that ends with a footnote and a forgotten name. This is a story about a pattern where the outsider keeps ending up on the inside, and the inside keeps ending up depending on the very people it once looked down on. Hold that thought, because Rahab is not the only woman on this list whose bloodline runs straight into the family tree of Jesus. Her name is Ruth, and she is not from Israel either. She is a Moabite. And if you know anything about the history between these two nations, you know that relationship was never friendly. Moab's own origin story, tucked into the book of Genesis, is a shameful one. Born out of Lot's daughters and their own father in a cave after the destruction of Sodom, Moabite women carried a reputation that would have made most Israelite families close the door before the conversation even started. And yet, when Ruth's Israelite husband dies, and her mother-in-law Naomi tells her to go home to Moab where she belongs, Ruth refuses her. In words you have probably heard read at a wedding without ever knowing where they came from, "Whither thou goest, I will go. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God." The Hebrew word behind that devotion is chesed. It does not just mean kindness, it means a loyal love that keeps showing up long after it stopped being convenient, long after anyone would have blamed her for walking away. It is Ruth's chesed toward a bitter, grieving old woman with nothing left to offer her that carries her step by step into the family line of King David himself. Think about what you have just watched happen. A shepherd boy pulled in from a field, a frightened farmer hiding in a hole, a prostitute in a doomed city, a widow from a nation her new neighbors were taught to distrust. 4 different stories, 4 different centuries, and every single one of them ends the same way. The person least likely to matter becomes the person the whole story turns on. If you are only now joining this list, that is the pattern you need to hold on to for everything still coming, because it is about to get far more personal than a field or a rooftop. Here's the part nobody tells you. Rahab and Ruth are not side characters tucked into Israel's history and forgotten. Open the very first page of the New Testament, the genealogy of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, and their names are written right there among the fathers. 2 foreign women, one a prostitute, one from a nation Israel was told to avoid, standing inside the bloodline of God become flesh. That is not an accident a careless writer let slip through. That is the whole pattern, stated in black and white. For anyone paying attention, now watch what happens next, because this list keeps climbing, and it is about to get personal. There is a man standing in front of a burning bush that will not burn up, and God is telling him to walk back into Egypt and confront the most powerful ruler on earth. His name is Moses, and he has every reason in the world to say no. He is a fugitive. 40 years earlier, he killed an Egyptian and fled into the desert to save his own skin. He has spent 4 decades since then herding sheep for his father-in-law. Forgotten by the empire, forgotten by his own people. And when God tells him to go speak to Pharaoh, Moses gives an answer that sounds almost like an excuse a child would give you. I'm slow of speech and of a slow tongue. A murderer with a stutter. That is who God sends to confront the throne of Egypt? Think about what you would have said in his position. Standing barefoot in front of a bush that burns without being consumed. You would have looked down at your own hands, still carrying the memory of a man you killed. You would have thought about the language that trips over itself every time you try to speak in front of strangers. You would have listed every reason this could not possibly be you. Moses says all of that out loud, and God does not remove a single one of his excuses. God simply gives him a brother named Aaron to speak for him, and sends him anyway, stutter and all. And this is where the pattern gets uncomfortable, if you are honest with yourself, because you start to notice something you cannot unnotice. Every single name so far carries a disqualifying detail attached to it. The youngest son nobody called in from the field. The man hiding in a hole calling himself the least in his family. A woman with a reputation the whole city knew by name. A foreigner from a nation with a shameful history. A fugitive who cannot even get a sentence out cleanly. If you were casting this story yourself, not one of them makes your short list. Let's take a breath here, because you are only halfway through this list, and the stakes are about to climb higher than a battlefield or a burning bush. If you have made it this far, you already sense the pattern is not an accident. It runs through the entire story of Scripture on purpose. And if that is true, if God has always worked this way, then whatever disqualified feeling you carry around the sense that you are too young, too flawed, too far outside, too late to the story, might not be the obstacle you think it is. If this is landing for you right now, stay with it. Because the next 4 names take this idea somewhere deeply personal. Go back further still. To the very beginning of Israel's family line, to a man named Jacob. He is the second-born, the younger twin, the one who should inherit nothing under the customs of his day. His own brother Esau, the firstborn, is the strong one, the outdoorsman, the obvious heir any father would be proud to hand things to. Jacob is a deceiver by his own family's description. His name is even built from a Hebrew root that can mean heel grabber or supplanter. Someone who takes what was never meant to be his. And yet it is Jacob's name that gets changed to Israel. It is Jacob's 12 sons who become the 12 tribes. The entire nation carries the name of the second-born trickster, not the firstborn who had every natural right to it. Here's what most people miss about that. God did not wait for Jacob to stop being Jacob before choosing him. The choosing came first. The wrestling, the wounding, the slow transformation into someone new, all of that came after, not before. Now step forward, past kings and judges and prophets, into a small town in Galilee that nobody thought much of at all. A teenage girl is sitting in a one-room house, engaged but not yet married, when everything changes in a single conversation with an angel. Her name is Mary. And when word later spreads that she is carrying a child before her wedding, you can imagine exactly what a small town like that would say about a girl like her, behind closed doors. There is a verse, later in the Gospels, where a man named Nathanael hears where Jesus is from and asks, almost as a joke, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" That was the town's reputation. Small, overlooked, not the kind of place you would ever expect history to bend around. And yet that is exactly where it bends. Try to picture the actual moment for a second. Not the painting on a wall version you may have grown up seeing, but the real one. A girl, maybe 14 or 15 years old by the customs of her time, alone in a small room. When a messenger of God appears and tells her she will carry the Son of the Most High in her own body. Unmarried, in a culture where that could have gotten her stoned to death or abandoned by the man she was engaged to. She has every reason to refuse. She has every reason to ask for someone else to be chosen instead of her. Her answer is 4 words long. Be it unto me. 4 words, and the entire rescue of the world hinges on whether a frightened teenage girl in an unimportant town says yes. The stakes are rising now, and you can feel it. This is no longer about one family's inheritance. This is the mother of God's own son, chosen from an unmarried teenager in a town people made fun of. Stay with this a little longer, because the next choice God makes is not one person, it is 12 at once. When Jesus begins building the movement that will outlast the entire Roman Empire, he does not walk into the religious schools of Jerusalem to recruit the sharpest minds of his generation. He walks along a shoreline and calls fishermen off their boats. He calls a tax collector, a man his own countrymen despised as a traitor working for Rome. Later, after these men have turned the ancient world upside down, the religious leaders in Jerusalem watch Peter and John speak with a boldness that stuns them. And the text tells you plainly that these leaders realized these men were uneducated and ordinary. The Greek word behind that is agrammatoi, unlettered, untrained, without the formal schooling any respected rabbi would expect. The historian Josephus, writing about this same era, describes just how far down the social ladder fishermen and tax collectors actually sat in first-century Jewish society. These were not respected men in their own time. These were the 12 God chose to carry the message of the resurrection to the rest of the world, and, by extension, all the way down to you, listening to this right now. Pay attention to this next one, because it is the most violent reversal on the entire list. Picture a man standing at the edge of a stoning, holding the coats of the men doing the killing, giving his approval to every stone that lands. His name is Saul of Tarsus. He does not stop there. He goes from house to house dragging Christian men and women out into the street and into prison. And later he will describe himself, without softening a single word for your comfort, as the chief of sinners. This is not a man with a checkered past who eventually cleaned up his act before God noticed him. This is a man actively hunting down and destroying the very people God is about to send him to lead for the rest of his life. And on a road to Damascus, a light stops him in his tracks, and a voice asks him a question he will spend the rest of his life answering for you and for everyone who reads it after him. Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? This is not a story about a man who quietly earned a second chance. This is not a story about someone who deserved forgiveness through good behavior he built up over time. This is not a story with a slow, believable redemption arc. This is a story about a persecutor turned into the greatest missionary the early church would ever produce. The man who would go on to write nearly half of the New Testament, all out of the wreckage of what he used to be. Centuries later, a North African man named Augustine sat in a garden in Milan, wrestling with a life of ambition and disordered desire he could not seem to walk away from, no matter how hard he tried. Weeping under a tree, when he heard what sounded like a child's voice from over a wall, singing, "Take up and read." He picked up a nearby scroll of Paul's letters, opened it at random, and the words he landed on broke something open in him that changed the rest of his life, and the rest of Western history along with it. The same pattern, the same kind of turn, ancient, and then centuries later, still happening to someone new. It could still be happening to you. One more name remains on this list, and it may be the smallest of them all, though what it teaches you may be the largest. A runaway slave named Onesimus flees his master and ends up, of all places, in the same city where the Apostle Paul is under house arrest. Under Roman law, Onesimus is property. He has no legal standing, no rights, nothing to offer anyone that would make him worth a second glance. And yet Paul leads him to faith while they are together, and then writes a short, personal letter back to his former master, a man named Philemon, asking him to receive Onesimus back not as a slave anymore, but as a brother. Paul writes that this man who was once unprofitable to you is now profitable, both to you and to me. A runaway, a piece of property under the law of his day, welcomed into the family of God as a brother, by name, in writing, preserved in Scripture for you to read 2,000 years later. 10 names. A shepherd boy left out in a field, a farmer hiding in a hole, calling himself the least of his family, a prostitute in a condemned city, a foreign widow from a nation with a shameful history, a stuttering fugitive with blood on his hands, a second-born trickster, an unmarried teenager from a town people mocked, a dozen fishermen and a tax collector with no formal training among them, a persecutor holding the coats at a stoning, a runaway slave with no legal standing at all. This is not a story about 10 unrelated exceptions scattered across an ancient book. This is not a story about luck, or timing, or 10 separate accidents that all happen to work out in the end. This is a story about the single most consistent pattern running through all of Scripture, page after page, that God has never once needed the obvious choice, and has almost always reached instead for the person everyone else had already crossed off the list. So here is what this means for you. First, the truth. The Bible was never written about impressive people doing impressive things for God. It was written about ordinary, flawed, overlooked people, and what God did through them anyway, over and over, without exception. Second, the implication, and this one is for you specifically. Whatever disqualifies you in your own eyes right now, too young, too broken, too far outside, too much history behind you, has never once been the deciding factor for God. In 4,000 years of this pattern, it rarely even makes the conversation. Third, and this is the one you should carry with you when this video ends. Somewhere in your life right now, there is a version of that field, that wine press, that rooftop in Jericho, that road to Damascus. A moment where you feel completely unqualified for what is standing in front of you. And if this pattern has held for 4,000 years straight, it has not stopped holding now. And it has not stopped holding for you. You were never overlooked. You were simply not called in from the field yet. Which of these 10 hit you the hardest? Tell me below, and tell me why. This is not a story about the past. This is a story about who gets chosen next. And that name might be yours.